policymakers on both sides of the Atlantic are very concerned about the allegations which have been made. And the ease with which data has been ported around. So I certainly think that the prospect of new regulation is a very real one. And let's not forget that, to a large extent, this is an unregulated area.
That risk of increased regulation is once again weighing on Facebook's stock, which took it on the teeth again today. It's worth around $60 billion less since news of the scandal with Cambridge Analytica broke, which that company has just suspended its CEO, Alexander Nix, pending an investigation. Regulatory scrutiny of Facebook is ramping up around the world. It follows claims a data analytics firm used by President Donald Trump's campaign improperly received 50 million users' data. In the U.S., the Federal Trade Commission is looking into whether Facebook violated a consent decree signed in 2011. The Securities and Exchange Commission says it will likely look at whether Facebook had an obligation to disclose the incident to shareholders before now. The House Energy and Commerce Committee will get a briefing from Facebook on Wednesday. The White House says it welcomes investigations into the matter. Meanwhile, British authorities are also investigating whether Facebook did enough to secure users' data, while MPs summon CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Here's just some of the reaction here in this country.
We've reached out as a department, democratic institutions, to CSIC to ask them to do an analysis of these recent events and to consider other ways that we can further strengthen the protection of our democratic institutions.
And then later, this exchange during question period.
Mr. Speaker, when Canadian men and women surf the web, they expect their data to be protected. And yet a scandal has just exploded in Great Britain. The analytical Cambridge firm was able to access the private data of tens of millions of individuals who use Facebook on a daily basis. This is highly worrisome because the reaction of Facebook, which is simply downplaying the risk, is just as worrisome. What is the Canadian government going to do to protect the private data of its users? We take the privacy of Canadians very seriously. And I am very pleased that the Privacy Commissioner has just said that there will also be a study here into these kinds of issues related to Facebook.
Now, regulatory and political pressure can be disastrous for a tech company. For a history lesson, take IBM, for example. Monopoly allegations started in the late 60s. It shook off regulators, but paranoia about further antitrust action contributed to Big Blue missing the full impact of the PC revolution. By 1992, IBM reported a loss of $8 billion, and what was then the biggest loss in U.S. corporate history. Microsoft became the dominant player in the PC age until it faced a series of antitrust cases in the U.S. and Europe during the late 1990s and into the 2000s. The company became distracted by legal fights and an internal culture shift. As a result, it was late to the game in online search and completely missed the rise of mobile apps and social media. Anyone remember MySpace? For more on this, we're joined by Siva Vaidyanathan, director of the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. He's also the author of Anti-Social Media, How Facebook Has Disconnected Citizens and Undermined Democracy. It's coming out this fall. It's nice to see you, sir. And I wonder if we can just start this. Do you think that Facebook is potentially at least facing its antitrust Microsoft time?
Well, it almost is. American antitrust is sort of at a crossroads right now. For much of the last 30 or 40 years, American antitrust has been focused on the question of price to the consumer or limitations on entry to the market, right? Those are like the two tests for antitrust. Facebook presents a really interesting dilemma for antitrust regulators because the market in this question is advertisers, and the price for advertisers has been going down. Even though advertisers have been flocking to Facebook and Google, overall the price of advertising has been going down significantly. In terms of entry to the market, Facebook, like Google, has long had the excuse of saying anyone can start a social network, just like anyone can start a search engine. I find that to be a specious argument, but it's one they are likely to make in any moment of antitrust concern. I think in terms of data protection and privacy regulation, they're much more vulnerable at this point.
So, I mean, short of antitrust, what are the kinds of regulation that you think are likely, specifically, like there is so much traction on this right now, there is a window to really sort of impose some regulations on a company like Facebook?
Yeah, so my great hopes lie in Brussels. It's an odd thing to say in this day and age, because European privacy regulators, data protection regulators, have a new set of tools that are coming online in August, a new law that the European regulators have been working on, the European Commission has been working on for a number of years with this sort of practice in mind. And what we're hoping is that Facebook will change its ways around the world in order to avoid facing more scrutiny and similar laws around the world. What's really likely to happen here is that Facebook will have to stop sharing our information without our explicit permission in a much more granular way than we have in the past, or that they have in the past. You know, the meltdown that we're seeing now with Cambridge Analytica lifting data from some third-party researchers at Cambridge University without Facebook's permission, that sort of thing has been going on for years. The practice itself was actually Facebook policy between 2010 and 2015 for all sorts of personal data, not just profiles of the people who agreed to play Words with Friends or Farmville or engage with personality quizzes, but all the data of all of their friends would go to these application makers. This was Facebook policy. It's one of the ways that Facebook encouraged people to build applications on the platform and thus grew Facebook's user base and time of use, etc. All of this was Facebook policy. This could have been stopped. This could have been a major uproar in 2010. It could have been a major uproar in 2012 when Barack Obama took the same kinds of information out of Facebook as Cambridge Analytica has been using. And yet in 2012, no one was paying attention when critics of Facebook and privacy advocates were saying, wait a minute, we have a serious problem here. Only recently, when you have the sort of nefarious spy novel characters of Cambridge Analytica involved, and I think it's just as important, a Europe-based company involved, do you get much stricter scrutiny from journalists and from regulators.
So, I mean, quickly, though, we knew all that. We knew this was coming. The moment is now. There's a preponderance of evidence that is clearly upon us. Do you think... What do you make of Facebook's response? Because we haven't heard from Zuckerberg, we haven't heard from Sandberg, and we're almost out of time. So just really quickly, do they have to come forward and give some kind of an answer here?
They certainly do. They're also stunned. They're stunned because the very thing they believed, that everything they were doing, that sharing more data with more people in more companies in more areas was better for the world. They truly, deeply believed that. This is not a cynical position they've ever taken. And it wasn't just for the money. The money was a nice thing that made them capable of imagining that they were improving the earth, improving the species. But in fact, now they're having to wake up to the nightmare that they created. It's like Dr. Frankenstein waking up and realizing, oh my God, I've created a beast that's doing things far beyond what I anticipated. But maybe if I had listened to critics, I could have anticipated this.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, but I really appreciate making the time.
Appreciate it, Peter.